white supremacy is everywhere. You also have that UFO culture. And in the UFO culture, you have one group of aliens, and they're called the tall whites, and they look like Norwegians.
Yeah, the Pleiadians. And they came and they changed the DNA of,
This video is a clinical and academic discussion intended for educational and scientific purposes. Our goal is to analyze the psychological mechanisms behind extremist ideologies to better understand their impact on individual behavior and society. We do not promote, condone, or normalize hate speech or any form of discrimination. This analysis is shared in the public interest to support psychological literacy and social awareness.
Okay, well, here we are. Good day, everyone. We are here with another show with, of course, our comrades Indi and Benji of the Resistance is Fertile podcast. We know each other already for quite a while, and I had a request from one of our most loyal subscribers. And I've never done that before, actually, to listen to a request from subscribers. But I was thinking like this person is always has been paying since the beginning and asked me to do a show about something, and I was like, yeah, why not? So he or she, let's keep that in the middle. Was very fascinated by our conversation on colonial mentality last time with David Houndé, and said, I wish you guys would do a show more deeply on the psychology of white supremacy, internalized white supremacy. And I was like, okay, that's a typical... I find it very interesting, of course, from a psychological standpoint. Like I always tell everyone how proud I am of my big grant here in Hong Kong to study colonial mentality, so in psychology. And I was like, okay, I think there is no better guests to do that with than, of course, Benji and Indi, who also talk about these things, also often from a psychological perspective. Benji said I'm the token white guy in these conversations. Well, Benji, I was just going to say for this show, I am 50% white guy. I come from a completely white family. My parents, my Dutch mother and Algerian father divorced when I was 4 years old. I grew up with my white mom, white stepdad, white sister. And so I was actually thinking, what made that so special is I got a white lens in life. I mean, let's be honest, I grew up culturally, you could say, white Dutch. Most of my friends, of course, are white Dutch, went to white schools, etc., etc. So I completely internalized the white culture, so to speak. Yeah. But I had the blessing, I should say, that in the weekends often, or once in every 2 weeks, I would go to my father. And my father, of course, was Algerian, with Algerian friends, Tunisian friends, Moroccan friends, also sub-Saharan African friends, how they say that. And that gave me a completely different second lens on life. And what that did is something very interesting. And I think that's why it's so helpful, I think, to me also in my academic work. It really gave me a second lens, outside perspective of life, that really often went against the lens I naturally got from my Dutch white family. And what it did was I actually can often critically look at the white lens, because that lens is mine too. So what often makes other people very angry, like, oh, you critique white people and the way white racism, this and that, and you guys don't understand.
People, they're always the poor guys.
Yeah, poor white people. But it's actually, the interesting thing is actually, no. That is my lens too, but I just got the tools, luckily, a second lens to look at it and see how stupid that makes us very often. And how narrow-minded that lens is. And to give you guys an example, I wanted to start off with a very interesting, very short video of a lady. Her name is Carol Kwiatkowski. Have you ever heard of her? Carol Kwiatkowski.
Is she the colonel that's...
Yes.
on Judge Knapp and other shows.
Yes, so she is one of the white people that is allowed on Judge Napolitano's show, because no brown people are allowed except Mohammed Marandi. But that's the exception.
One of the few ladies also, right? One of the few.
And I was just going to say, and one of the few ladies, but the ladies are all white. But the only person of color, if I can remember, is Mohammed Marandi, and besides that, no non-whites allowed. But I'm going to show you a short video. And I think that can introduce a bit to what we were talking about.
I'm trying to figure out now, how come I didn't realize then that he was so full of bullshit? He was such a liar, such a just playing everybody. I don't get it.
Well, I think if there's any, people criticize libertarians who got on board and support Donald Trump, but, haven't support the policies that they disagree with. And one thing is, you do have to have some level of optimism, right? If a politician is out there saying things that are in line with our philosophy, then you do have to at least support that rhetoric, because if you're just sitting there going, no, he's a liar, it's not going to work, then you're going to turn off anybody who's going to listen to you, because they're going to just see you as a nihilist. So, yeah. I think it's reasonable position. In fact, we'll probably be talking about that on the show next week, because the great...
I'm not understanding the logic here, but yeah.
I love it.
Sorry. I actually started a little bit too late. I wanted to start with the fact that she explains what made her so attracted to Donald Trump back in the day, and then she ends with I cannot believe I was so fooled by Donald Trump. I cannot believe that I fell for it. And I am saying,
I can't believe it's not better.
And I am saying this. Why am I sharing with you this? I will share the right video once I edit it. So why am I sharing this with you of Karen Kwiatkowski saying that she was so fooled that she fell for it for Donald Trump, that she cannot believe she did that. And when I saw that, I realized this is how stupid white supremacy makes you. And I'm not saying this to be insulting. I'm not saying this to be to saying, oh, she is so dumb. No, actually, the interesting thing is, she's actually very, very cool to listen to often, and she says very, very good stuff. And what I'm trying to say is that white supremacy is not something we do on purpose often and internalize to be a racist. White supremacy is a form of culture that we have in the West, where we are not realizing how we are seeing the white culture and whiteness as the norm, and we become blind for many things that you would see if that was not the case. Now, what I'm trying to say is that very intelligent people, for example, like Karen, become stupid because of a cultural gaze that we get, the white supremacist gaze, that makes you so blind that you can literally fall as an intelligent woman for the crap that Donald Trump was selling to people. Now, why am I saying this? It is not a coincidence that an overwhelming majority of people of color or marginalized groups did not vote for Donald Trump. So, in other words, they saw something that many people classified as white would not see. If you would not have that kind of blindness, you would already know the first time when you would see Donald Trump how terrible he was, what a racist he was, how disgusting opinions he had of marginalized groups, etc., etc. The problem with the white supremacist gaze is that it makes you blind to what people, marginalized groups, I hate the word, but what else can I say, to what marginalized groups are seeing. You become blind to that, or you just consciously ignore it, and you still think this man can be a salvation. But if you would have the gaze of somebody, of a Mexican who would feel marginalized by that, or a Muslim, or you name it, you would think, are you kidding me? You believe this racist? You would, and I saw the same thing happening with Tulsi Gabbard. The exact same thing. I've seen Muslims complaining about Tulsi Gabbard already for a decade, if not more, saying she's an Islamophobe, she's a pro-terrorism war hawk, she's a racist, she's a Hindu nationalist.
Yes.
People did not want to listen. Judge Napolitano also didn't want to listen because, hey, she said some good things. Why am I saying this? And I'm talking long, so I'm going to leave it soon. What I'm trying to say is this is one of the examples of unconscious, unwitting, internalized white supremacy that can make you completely ignore the shit politicians say about marginalized groups, discriminated groups, whatever. You're completely blind to it, and you still fall for these reactionary charlatans because you don't get that second lens that makes you sensitive to that crap. That's why these people still celebrate, for example, Viktor Orban. I mean, the guy is celebrated in white circles often. It's crazy. Or the AfD in Germany. But people who do have that second lens, for example, you, Indi, but also a lot of white people, don't get me wrong, who learned that second lens, do not fall for that crap. You know, and that's a kind of an example I wanted to give to you guys of the stupidification that comes from white supremacy. Do you guys get a bit what I'm hinting at?
You're right up in the
of
streets there. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so like you, I also grew up white, basically, right? So I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and I didn't really start. And when I went to school at like age 5, I actually couldn't speak English, and the teacher was like, "The kid can't speak English." So my parents started speaking English to me at home, and then we switched to English. My Sinhala is now quite bad, and then I grew up. So when I grew up, I remember I did an article on it for the school paper in high school, and my school was 98 or 99% white. So I was like, and the thing is, when you're the only brown person, I would say I didn't really encounter racism because it would be kind of pointless being racist towards like one person. Once you get like 5 or 10 or more, then racism, I think, maybe becomes relevant. But if you're being racist in my school, it'd be like, why are you picking on, they call me Jit. Like, why would you be picking on Jit? It'd just be like picking on one random kid. But I grew up like thinking I was, and that's the nature of whiteness, right? I think you have to understand that whiteness is a fluid identity. It start at some point, you know, there is like basically a solar differential. Like if you're in the Europe, you get less sun, and if you're in the places in the South, you get more sun. And then at the time of colonialism, that was basically energy. It was a pretty rough measure of how much energy a place was getting, and the solar poor regions came and robbed the solar rich ones, and it was a very convenient way of identifying like who to rob. But now it's with colonialism, there's been huge movements of people. There's been movements of like Africans to America, to the Caribbean. There's been a lot of movements of Indians around, and it's a mix. So Noel Ignatieff has written about how like the Irish became white, how Italians became white, different. And so the next people in line to become white are very much people like me, like Tulsi Gabbard or Rishi Sunak or Priya Patel or who else?
Cash Patel now.
Yeah, Akash Patel, who people tell me I look like, and I really find that insulting. But like, I guess the
or
eyes
people
are
like what's his name? That Lebanese Arab guy, Gerald Horn often uses him as an example. He's a very good leftist. What's his name? Ralph Nader, for example.
Ralph Nader
these are like,
is Lebanese. Okay, crazy.
Yeah,
okay,
he's Arab.
Okay, so Steve Jobs is Syrian. Like I think like a lot of these. So you can see that like people become white. Like what I joke about is that it comes out in like the brown comes out in like 1 or 2 washes, and we become sort of the new colonizers. You can see the whiteness is. People are like, oh, don't talk about color, and it's like, okay, just like it's a color, as in like Manchester United is red, right? It's like a representative color, and white is a representative color, and it's an identity that a lot of people can buy into and grow into. But like you, I had a second like view of it. And so for me, when I went to college in Montreal, then people started asking me where I was from, and I was like, I'm from Ohio, and that somehow was not a satisfactory answer. And then I had to like reconnect with like my Sri Lankanness to figure out like what I was. And that was around the time of like 9/11, and then suddenly everything got like more obvious. And then things got more like split. And I noticed that like Muslim people, like Muslim, I mean, there's a Muslim girl I knew, and she started covering her hair, and then like things, I've noticed that things were like changing. But that identity process was a process of like mental decolonization. Because when I came back to Sri Lanka, I still thought like a white person. We have a word for people like that here. We call them kalusuddas, black whites. So I guess Fanon would say black skin, white masks. And a lot of the most sort of like ruthless enforcers of colonialism have always been people that look like me. The people like Britain didn't have that many people here. They didn't have that many people in India. They would the guy administering colonialism would more often than not be a brown guy. And sadly, very often, even in Africa, he would be also like an Indian or a brown guy. And when they wanted to put down rebellions like the 1858, the 1860s rebellion, they would just get brown guys from a different part or like a different caste or like a different. So in Sri Lanka, it was like Tamil versus Sinhala. And for the putting down the Indian rebellions to get someone from somewhere else. And there's that sort of fracturing of like all the colored identities and playing them against each other, whereas the white identity stays solid. Like Sri Lankans were never able to fracture like Scots against English, or I guess maybe we never figured that out. But like you can see that the white identity like stays kind of solid. So they might have their fights within each other, but they all get together to beat down on the colored people, and it's in a very effective identity in that sense. And then people kind of consciously or subconsciously, want into it. And I mean, I'll just give you one example, then we'll just pass it. But so there's a place I go like to. There's like a sports club. It's like so that club used to be like whites only, and I think it was only in the 50s or 60s, and then it like opened up. But I could see from like the records of the like races and stuff on the walls that there's like Van Dykes and Dutch names and white names, and slowly it becomes brownified. But then you look at the class structure inside, and it's like it's all rich brown people, and then so it's like we kind of took their chairs, and we took the colonial administration, and a lot of people basically aspire to whiteness still. And then when we immigrate, some of the most so Reform UK, I think like the deputy chair is a Sri Lankan guy, a Sri Lankan Muslim actually, and AFD, you're talking about the German party, that leader's partner, wife or whatever, is a Sri Lankan lady. And like, so you can see that quickly we become enforcers of whiteness. So it's a powerful and weird thing. I mean, let's get into the dimensions of that, but that's just my experience with it. I have the psychological damage, but Benji is the psychologist.
You go ahead, Benji. Sorry, like I said in the chat, Benji, I muted you for background noise, so you can unmute yourself now.
Okay. Oh, here's the chat. Yeah, you only ever become a psychologist to try and unfuck yourself, I guess, basically. I think personal histories have a lot to do with it, as I would say, as a psychologist, personal histories and context. Like when we first dreamt of Reef Podcast, we sent some pilot episodes to people whose work we admired, and one of those was your good self, Karim. And you came back and said, "That's great, can we help you?" And just one piece of advice: don't ever do anything to please your audience. But of course, there's a caveat to that. It's you just said it, unless they pay you well enough. You said, and this is exactly that's a good reason. I'm joking, but I think I'm trying to get somewhere. Personal histories are very important, and my personal history is I'm a totally white guy, but by some strange accident, my father's two sisters, one married a communist Vietnamese or Vietnamese communist. I'm not sure which way, you're supposed to say these things to be politically correct. And the other one had a child with a student from Cameroon who then disappeared from her life. So I had half Vietnamese cousins. I had one half, I don't know if it means anything to talk in this way, but one, to me, I had Vietnamese cousins and I had a black cousin also. And the other part of my personal history, which I only realize now having, at the ripe of age of 58, come to the understanding that I'm autistic is the autism is also part of the way I function. So, as a kid, I would take every mechanical thing I could lay my hands on, I would take apart. And it took me about 10 years before I could put anything back together. So I used to, but I was always trying to understand how things worked. And also, as an autistic guy, you're always kind of on the outside. You don't know the codes, you don't fit in groups. So you're always kind of not fitting. And from the outside, you look at the mechanics of it. Right? And because I had those people of color in my family, in my close family, I used, to interact with them. I used to listen to my uncle when he was talking about the anti-imperialist fight. In my family, I never met him, but my grandfather, who was a Germanophile, joined the armed resistance against the Nazis. And my grandmother lived to 107, and she would, if you asked her, she would tell you a little bit about what that was like. But this is all part of what made me, right? And also because I have a German sounding name coming from this region of Lorraine, which has been, fought over and fought for between Germany and France, or German principalities, before there was a German nation, and France, which as a nation came kind of earlier. I was subjected to some anti-German slurs as a kid, right? Because during the occupation, the very small proportion of French people who resisted, it's below 2% and maybe below 5% that were really committed to the resistance. And that all changed, the minute the Nazis lost, 95% of the French population, of course, became lifelong resistance members. But I could, and French people became very anti-German. Like they became like now you could say Palestinians are anti-Semitic because they say, you get the Jews out. Of course, Zionists come and say, we're the Jews, and now you're going to see what the Jews do. And then they will carve Stars of David on your cheeks or on your old schools and all the rest of it. So, to the population, you're German, you're Nazi, you're just an occupier, and then we are going to call you in the most negative way that we can. And we have all these names. And I could see also Italians in France. There was a lot of Italian immigration into France after the First World War. There was a lot of Spanish and Portuguese immigration after the First World War. There was, of course, a lot of Algerian immigration after the Second World War also. And you could see it from the outside. I could see the shifting contours of the groups that were targeted just in, everyday discourse. Because I was very much on the outside, I would listen to what people would say, and I could very quickly see that I was being raised in this sea of racism. Like I remember as a 10-year-old, I used to go to the public school next to my to where I lived with my parents, and my best friend was the son of African refugees living in a special refugee hotel, right? And I remember my mother coming to me and saying, yeah, you have to be careful. My dad was a dentist, a well-off middle-class person. You have to be careful bringing people who have less to our house because, it will make them feel bad and everything. And all this couched in perfectly liberal terms. But in fact, you could feel the racism behind. Like suddenly my mother was telling me, your best friend was like very dark skinned because both of his parents were African. You have to be careful with him. You have to be careful what you show him, what you tell him, where you bring him and all the rest of it. There was all this kind of, hey, what the hell is going on here? And the worst of the worst, it was this constant anti-Arab racism. Like, French society is so anti-Arab. And it felt strange to me because having an anti-imperialist communist uncle talking a little bit about colonialism, and, I immediately was on the side of Algerian liberation. And I'm like, why are we supposed to hate people that we colonize so savagely? You know, there was something really weird about it, right? So I spent my whole childhood and adolescence feeling even more of an alien for kind of being on the outside, but I wasn't that much on the outside that I wasn't also trained, you know, as a white person. And so now I'm going to speak as a white person, as a white person. And I think those things are very important because history makes us. And Karim, you forgot to mention that on the white side of your family, I think you had some Dutch communists, right? So you probably also heard some of that
Grandfather, yep.
universalist talk, and you know, and it has its impact. Like my grandfather was white, but went against the Nazis, and the very interesting thing I wrote a Substack article a little bit about him was when he joined the resistance, you know, the guy was a Germanophile. He was a lover of German culture. He was a teacher of German in high school, right? And you have an exam in France, it's a national exam, and you get ranked for the whole nation. And in 1942, he came top of this exam. He just loved Germany. Well, you know what? When he joined the Nazis, when he joined the anti-Nazi resistance, sorry, Granddad, I didn't mean to say it like this. When he joined the anti-Nazi resistance, I know for a fact that he didn't go around saying, "Oh, you shouldn't use slur words to describe the Germans. You know, it's very bad. This thing that you say." The French resistance, or the French had this thing: one crowd for to each their crowd, meaning each French person needs to kill a German, right? And it's kind of, you know, genocidal in a way. You could say, "Oh, why do you want to genocide the Germans?" But during the time of the fight, of course, he never spent 1 minute going, you know, Goethe, Heine, Karl Marx, and Hegel, and Kant, and Fichte, and Schopenhauer, and all these things that, and on the music side, of course, even more Beethoven or whatever, that German culture brought to humanity. You shouldn't, you know, tar the whole of Germany with the brush of Nazis. Of course, you don't do that because you're fighting this thing, and it doesn't matter to you if people join the fight because they want to go after the Germans or go after the Nazis. Right now, you need that fight. And so then I became a psychologist to try to understand how come I didn't fit in. And I came to this understanding of psychology that goes to the bottom of what you could call mental structures. I like the word systems of meaning better because it's more dynamic and it's not something outside of yourself. And when you have a society in which you have domination, in which you have exploitation, that forms the substrate for particular systems of meaning. And when you have this domination, this exploitation, be it patriarchal, be it, you know, economic, be it racial, in the sense that white empire, as I call it now after my good friend Indi, for 500 years has been using that justification, you know, we can do whatever we want to the folks overseas, like they used to say, because they are inferior to us, right? So it comes with a system of meaning that prescribes fundamental human worth as being different between different people. And it's ever shifting. Why? Because it's based on the material realities of society, right? So you have the bourgeois thinking that they are better, they have more worth than the working class. You have this, you know, in France, the northerners, they thinking they are better than the southerners. You have the guys from this side of the tracks thinking they're better than the guys from the other side of the track, just based on their place in the social structure, when that structure is one of domination and one of exploitation. So you have, of course, men thinking they're better than women, and you have, you know, white people, however you call this, thinking they're better than brown people, French people thinking they're better than Italians, German thinking they're better than French, Dutch thinking they're better than everybody because the Germans stole their bicycles during the Second World War and have my Fitzgerald and all the rest of it. And these structures of fundamental inequality in basic human worth, they go at the heart of our psyches. I don't think it's wanting to kill your father and having non-consensual sexual intercourse with your mother that's at the heart of the psyche, like Mr. Freud said. I think what's at the heart of our psyche is how we relate to one another and to ourselves. And if we relate to one another as being more than, less than, not in terms of abilities or whatever, or achievements, but in terms of this fundamental human worth. Like when I look into your eyes, I can see myself as being less or more human than you. Then you know for a fact that you're living in an exploitative society that is based on some form of domination, right? And it can be any kind of form. And if you look at then the political economy, it makes a lot of sense that a very dominant form of that is going to be what we call white supremacy. You can see it from the inside. We are trained into it. We are born into it, but on both sides of it, like this is, what Frank Fanon also saw. It's not just the white people seeing themselves as being superior. It's also the non-whites being educated in seeing themselves as somehow inferior, and the working class seeing themselves as inferior, as the bourgeoisie. Why is Elon Musk the richest man in the world? Well, because he is better than us. In some deep sense, he deserves it, and I don't. It's inside all of those structures, right? And it behooves us, when we want to free ourselves from that mental colonization by these systems of meaning that prescribe more or less human worth to individuals, to groups, to ourselves inside the group also can happen. And then you end up spending money on somebody like me to free yourself from it. It behooves us to notice those structures and to gradually climb out of them, which is a kind of a lifelong process anyway, because at some level, so long as those structures of exploitation will exist out there in the world of political economy, they will be fed to us because we're trying to make sense. We're narrative creators trying to make sense of the world. And even if that went, it would still be there for a while because we are, we are made by our history, like the history of my grandfather, even as I narrate it to myself, which is a reconstruction, is part of it. My history of having seen all that racism and seeing it myself sometimes, like when I would walk in parts of town with more Arabs, a part of me would be scared. A part of me would go, oh my God, be careful, maybe you're going to be attacked or whatever. And I went to LA in 92 at the time of the riots. And I don't have that at all with Black people because I wasn't born in a society where, Black people were grouped in that ghettoized way that we do with Arabs in France. And so I would walk through Watts and whatever, and I got mugged at one point in a park by a group of Black people. And I wasn't scared. I couldn't get it. I never got scared. I got angry. But you see, I could see that if this had happened to me at the hands of Arab people, it would have reawakened all my pre-programming to fear Arabs. But I didn't have that with Black people. So, yeah.
Can I jump on that for a moment? Because that is very interesting, and that is a very important aspect, I think, also on the way racism and white supremacy works. And that is, what is very important is that it's unconscious. It builds up through many, many kind of small situations in your life. You gave some very good examples. You said when you were a very little kid, you had that your mother said when you had that little black young black friend. What did your mother warn you about again? What was it exactly? Her warning?
Well, because they have nothing. If you bring him too much to our apartment where, we are well off, then he's going to feel bad. And you don't want to do that to him because he has nothing. And it's.
Right, right. So I find it very important example because it's the accumulation of these small examples that eventually build in your brain a psychological understanding, unconscious, unwitting, of white supremacy. Okay, that's why I became an academic psychologist. So not like you are clinical, I'm an academic psychologist. So I focus more on the theoretical understanding of how white supremacy works in a culture, how that connection from culture to brain, how that exactly works. And this cumulative effects of all these small things, I can give you examples too. I remember my mother back in the day saying that, okay, be careful, don't walk with too many brown kids into the city because people will maybe look at you differently. You will have these kind of things. Or I remember even my dad talking about internalized white supremacy, Indi, what you were talking about, of formerly colonized people. Even though my dad was virulently anti-racist and anti-colonial, he still was a victim to it, because I can remember him telling to me, I said, Dad, why did you never teach me Algerian? Why did you never teach me Arabic? And he said, no, I didn't think that was smart back in the day because I didn't want you to hang out with the wrong friends. Okay, that is a form of internalized,
Of course.
you could say, racism and white supremacy. Mm-hmm. Now, why do I think this is so important? What you just said also about, I was not afraid of black people, I was afraid of Arabs. That is because the cumulative effect of all these little racist things are different in different societies. In one society, you have a cultural effect continuously of so-called scary black people, scary Mexicans. That's the cultural context of the United States. If you go to France or the Netherlands, like where I'm from, it's a heavy cultural obsession with Arabs and Muslims. Yes. And it would be amazing. It would literally be amazing if you would come out of this cultural conditioning completely unscathed. That is, you would have no racist feelings whatsoever towards Muslims or Arabs. It's almost impossible, considering all the cumulative effects of news, of media, of education, of video games, of
I would like to interject just for a second, because I lived in the Netherlands for 7 years. And I was struck by one thing. In the Netherlands, the most targeted Arab population is Moroccans. In France, it's Algerians. And literally, in France, we consider Moroccans as kind of benign Arabs, but the Algerians are the really bad guys. And then I got to the Netherlands, and suddenly everybody looked upon the Moroccans as the bogeyman. And I was, you guys don't get it. Moroccans are really nice. And this is the way, I think also living in many different countries, you start to get it, because, whoa, hey, what's with Moroccans? They're nice. And not that I ever thought, consciously, I wanted to think the Algerians are the dangerous ones, but this is the French, this is the French culture. And the Dutch culture is all about Moroccans, right?
Absolutely, and I can tell you this: in the Netherlands, literally no one cares about Algerians. Literally no one. And to be honest, most people don't even know what Algerians are. I remember one person saying, I remember when I was a teenager, there was one guy who thought that the Algerians were neighbors of Bulgarians. It was so funny. But anyway, what final point about this? And I hope people will not get angry by this, but like we discussed, Benji, I'm never going to shut up because of what certain audience people want or don't want, because I think this is very important. You said, if you go to France, people are more afraid of Algerians. If you go to the Netherlands, more for Moroccans. If you go to the United States, more black people, etc., etc. That's that cultural context. Now, where does that cultural conditioning come from? Like I said, it comes from education, video games, movies, Hollywood, Netflix, algorithms, etc., etc. I recently wrote a very in my opinion, interesting paper about this, and it was actually published in Nature. It's called Nature Review Psychology. So it's everybody's dream in academia to publish in Nature, and it actually makes this case how that culture to cognition pipeline works. And this is why I even write in that paper why so-called woke policies, wokeness, is not a bad thing. So why am I saying this? Wokeness and woke policies counter condition your brain against the idea that certain individuals are lower, inferior, nasty, bad. That is, if you are in a culture where continuously video games are white heroes, brown people are bad, Arabs are bad, in books Arabs are bad, but when you have so-called woke policies, where you have suddenly diversity enforced on you, so you see Arabs in positive roles, you see Arabs as doctors, as teachers, you see Arab pictures in books, you see Arab heroes in video games, all these woke policies, the cumulative effect of these kind of changes your psychology, your brain, in the way you look at people. And it's so. This is why I get so icky all the time. I get so, I feel so irritated, you could say in a way, when I see a group of white individuals amongst each other just telling each other how bad woke is and how bad wokeness is. And I get it. There are liberal abuses of woke policies whilst not doing anything systemically. I know the discussion. But there is nothing more irritating than to uncritically, completely reject something because there are some nefarious parties abusing the concept. Wokeness and woke policies are actually very important to counter condition your brain, to make your brain start to see people in a similar way. Okay, you understand what I mean? If you would see people in a very different representation continuously, little children would grow up opening books and seeing dark-skinned people and Arabs and Muslims in many positive roles, okay, wokeness, woke policies, that would literally change the way they see the world. So again, final point. I don't know how you see that, Indi. Do you also feel a bit of uncomfortable inside when you see this group of white individuals discussing together how they are so sick of woke and anti-woke? If they would go a little bit deeper, they would maybe understand that it's not all that bad. You know, it's actually kind of necessary.
I feel like every generation, white people find another way to say the N-word without saying it. So woke is kind of like the new code word. When I was young, they were like freaking out about ebonics or something, right? They'll just find some way to say the N-word. So woke comes from just like an African American saying of like, when you go into a certain town, like these sunset towns, which are very real, you need to be alert. You need to be woke. You need to be like conscious. And most woke policies are just like relatively sensible. But there is the danger within there, right? That if you get representativeness within the white media, that is kind of part of the process of like becoming white. Like if you went back to the 20s and whatever vaudeville, they'd be like making fun of Irish and Italians, and they don't do that anymore. So now Irish and Italians are like straight up white people. So the risk is, as you start getting brown face. So there's this movie, I think, Finest Hour. It's about Churchill, who to me is like a war criminal or whatever. And then they consciously put colored people in like little side roles. So they have one brown girl who's operating a switchboard or whatever. And then someone asks her where she's from. And then she's like, I'm from Finchley. Like, obviously, because she doesn't want to assert her any sort of like Indian or Desi identity. And that to me is like not, I didn't like that representation, right? That's the sort of representation where it's like the destruction of the colored identity becomes your ticket into representation. And then there was another case where people online were happy that a brown girl had walked in a Victoria's Secret catalog, and or whatever, that fashion show. And then, but like Victoria's Secret is owned by Les Wexner, who is the money behind Epstein. He's like the dirtiest. He's worse than Epstein probably. And I'm like, what are we cheering to be represented in? You know, because we kind of become the new colonizers in a new sense. We get represented. So you're absolutely right about just the ambient racism. Like I didn't even notice it growing up, but if you watch even casual movies, like the villain is either an Arab or a Russian, right? And then I remember when I forget his name, Rami something, when he did some James Bond movie, he's like, I don't want to portray an Arab bad guy, so then he played like a Russian, and I was like, come on, man, like that's not the problem. The bad guy should be like, I would love to see like a brown James Bond where someone goes and like robs the British Museum and like waterboards the Queen or something, but like it's still like people.
Well, there was a black James Bond, right? What's his name? Dries?
No, he never. He would have been a good one, but there hasn't been.
Oh.
No, he was
okay.
like a candidate for it, but no, never. No, I mean, you watch James Bond now, and it's like, what is going on? It's like a British guy, like violating every law in the world, like smashing up every country, and like calling in like drone strikes on like random colored people or Russians, or like it's so ambient that you don't even notice it. In like, let's say, not Parks and Recreation, right? I was just Parks and Recreation. Like, I was watching. There's a brown guy in it, Aziz Ansari, and they made his name like Tom Haverford. So it's just like this complete erasure of whatever I think he's Bangladeshi, whatever identity. And there's a joke in him where they've dug up one picture of him wearing like some clothes from his country, and they call it Taliban robes, and they're like making fun of him. And then he laughs along, right? And I think there's a show in the United States called The United States of Ali, where they bring back an Afghanistani translator or whatever. It's part of it is also just like the digestion of colored people into this like paste of whiteness. And we talk about whiteness as maybe being a racist identity, but it's also kind of an it's an inclusive identity. It's always sucking people in because it needs people. It needs people to like become white. It needs people like me to become Kash Patel. It needs people like you, Karim, to become, I don't know who's the equivalent of an Algerian that's flipped, like Richard Hanania, right? He's like kind of like a white supremacist Palestinian, like, but these people have their uses. And then Benji, even you say you identify as like white, but you're kind of French, right? It's you would identify as white actually for the purposes of like, you get this privilege to kind of be a colonizer. You get this privilege to go into Canada, and then we have to apply for it. But we get the same privilege. And where I grew up, it was ruthlessly segregated. That in Ohio, in Columbus, there's a highway. They just ram down the middle of Columbus, and all the black people are on one side, and all the white people are on the other side. But the loophole is the Asians go into the white side, so we get filtered like, and they screen us, right? They're like, what's your education level? Like, what's this? Like, what's that? And then we go through these check boxes, and then we hop over to the white side, over the African Americans who've been there for like hundreds of years, and then we become racist. And then you talk to, like, you might look at my face and think, oh, this is like a natural ally. Someone like me is not a natural ally. Like, someone like me is naturally suspicious. We can be like hella racist because we buy in, because whiteness, you have to understand it as like it's not just for white people anymore. It's, it's an inclusive identity which expands, and I think it's collapsing. But the funny part is that as it's collapsing, it'll be like brown people kind of as the face of it, and so they'll be like, so the white people will say like, when we ran it, everything was great, and it's only when we let the brown people, then everything went to shit.
If I can just quickly jump in, Benji, I give it to you. So I totally agree with you on that, Indy. But you know what the problem is? That point that you just made, I don't want people to just for the sake of it be included into a diverse identity, and then they become white supremacists themselves. They become part of the capitalist classist system themselves. What I hate is that a bunch of white people together use that argument to then say it's just completely nonsense. Let's just stop doing it. I'm sick of woke. I'm sick of that. Oh, and it needs to be a black woman and this. No, okay. I totally agree with that point, Indy. Totally agree. But let's first start with humanizing people of color, please. So in other words, when I grow up, or a little kid grows up right now, that they open a book and see brown doctors and black teachers and female this and Arab that and Muslims this. That's step number one, okay? That, of course, we can fight the class structure and people going into white supremacy and capitalism. I fully agree with that. But I think we have a more pressing moment right now, is that we first get that humanization, where at least some representation of kids growing up seeing themselves in positive roles. Because that's really missing, man. I mean, every single video game almost that you play in 2026 made by Japanese video game creators are about white people. And I just wrote an article on that on my BettBeat Substack. Why are Japanese video game studios only making video games about white people? Where does that come from? And I say it's a deep internalized form of colonial mentality and inferiority, where you do not humanize other human beings, where the games about the future only show Europeans, even though you're a complete team of Japanese video game creators. And I think that is not only damaging to these people themselves, I think it's very damaging to children growing up in our world. It recreates that evil of white supremacy within the mind of every individual. Okay, sorry, Benji, go ahead. You're muted.
First, I'm all for DEI because I get to be the token white guy on all these shows with all you great superior brown folks. French, I don't actually self-identify as white because I'm French, and the French have this very particular form of white supremacy that erases whiteness. The French are universalists. The French are, liberty, fraternity, equality. It's not the other. Liberty, equality, fraternity. They always forget the third one and the second one and the first one. And so we think of ourselves as the universal man. We wrote the first declaration of the rights of man. And so we're not even white. Like, it's when we come to North America, we have to blend in and, but the first thing we get as French people when we look at America, we go, why are these people obsessed by color? There is no color in the world. There is only this universal Western superior thing. And so when you look, and by the way, Karim, I want to say, I'm a clinical psychologist, but my real passion is theory. Like, I'm still the 8-year-old kid that wants to take everything apart and see how it works. And so I'm always looking at how it works. I want to know how it works. And once you're there, you notice that this, and again, I want to bring you back at the basis of your system of meaning in terms of you as an individual, you in relation to others, you as part of a group, and in relation to the group, and you as part of a group in relation to other groups. There is always the question of, do you live inside a system of meaning that prescribes that some have more fundamental human worth and dignity than others or not? And when the answer is yes, then you know you are living in some kind of, we call it supremacy system, but system that prescribes unequal human worth, and that takes you all the way, if you let it, and it's meant for this, all the way to dehumanization and to genocide and to make naturalizing inequality and exploitation. So you have all these naturalizing discourses, but of course men are stronger than women and smarter, and of course white people have higher IQ scores, and of course this and that, and of course French people have the universalizing civilization, and Algerians, sometimes we didn't get along, but we brought civilization to you guys. And you know what I'm saying? So this is the crux of it. And once you understand this is the crux of it, you also understand that it will shapeshift forever. And again, according to what? Not according to the weather or to the whims of television, but according to the political economy and the social forces. And this you learn from the first moment you start to relate things. And on that thing, I asked you, Karim, if I could share an image. I also sent it by email. So you guys are catching me at a very Chinese moment of my life. I'm learning Mandarin. I'm going to go 5 weeks to China to train psychotherapists this summer. And my dream is to leave the West and live there. And so I interact with many Chinese people, and one of my Chinese friends, she's kind enough to listen to my very poor Mandarin and stuff. And she showed me one thing. During COVID, China reorganized everything so that they could function as locked down as they needed to be. And so they put the school curriculum online from the first day of school. And she showed me the website and she showed me the first picture. And I don't know if you can show it, Karim, but to me, it's very, very telling what it is. The first picture that
I will share it once I edit.
Okay. The Chinese school kids see when they start to look at books in school is this beautiful picture of all the different ethnic groups represented by children their age of China. And it says something like, let me have a look at it. It says something like, we are Chinese people. We are all Chinese people, and we are all, these different ethnics are part of the Chinese nation. Well, actually, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different ethnic groups represented as children dressed in traditional, very connoted dress. So the first thing you see is this. If you look at the school books in the West, of course, the first people you see are white folks. If you look at the school books in the Zionist colony and what's her name, Nurit Peled Elehan has done a lot of studies on the Zionist school books. You see, of course, only white people, aka white Jews. And you only see Arabs represented as either goat herders or terrorists. And it comes from very early on, this kind of thing. And it serves a purpose. Like when you have a communist party in power and whatever people may think about what China is doing, the ideology is we are all different, but all the same in terms of basic human worth. We are all part of the same family. So in that national family, in that sense, we are equal. And that, brothers and sisters, is fundamental. And it's very interesting because, I interact with many Chinese people and
that's very woke.
They are not racist. Like there is all genre of Chinese vlogs by non-Chinese people done by Black people. And they go and they say, it's incredible. This is the first country in the world where we go to and people are not racist. Sometimes they're curious about our skin color. They may want to touch us or whatever, but they are not racist. And I was talking about this with my Mandarin teacher, and she said, no, that's absolutely true. But we have discrimination against women, especially older women who find it more difficult to find jobs than men and stuff. So you see, you still have a little bit of that going on, but literally you don't have a supremacist culture based on color because those Chinese people have never lived off colonization at the end of the day.
Can I jump in for a moment on that? And I think you're right. I think the Chinese, I'm teaching Chinese all the time, and the majority of my classes are even mainland Chinese. And I do agree that the concept of race and racism is not there in China. That's the benefit of not being formally, at least, colonized. But there is a problem in China that deserves attention, and I wrote about it also in 2020 in a paper. It's called Perspectives on Psychological Science. It's a American journal where I actually do highlight that there is another problem here that is also a form of supremacy, and that is colorism. Colorism is the almost obsessive appreciation of light skin. That is a big problem also here in China, to the extent that also women are especially women are obsessively focused on it. And I just checked that picture of yours, Benji, and indeed you see that diversity, but there's one diversity they do not show, and that's skin color diversity. They're all pale skinned. The Xinjiang people, it doesn't matter, the South Chinese, they're all light skinned, white, pale, peachy colored skins, and that is a form of classism that's deep rooted in Chinese society. Don't get me wrong. That's heavy stuff, man. I've seen skin color discrimination here in China, especially towards people with darker skin. That's severe. And the issue in China is that it's still not a public debate. It's in many ways it's assumed as so normal that people do not see this as a societal issue to bring into the public. It's a very small human rights groups and marginalized groups that try to put this under public attention, but it doesn't get a lot of attention. And I think that's problematic because it feeds into white supremacy. So why am I saying this? If you already have this cultural inclination towards pale skin, it's very easy to psychologically internalize that the palest people in the world are superior. Even if you are consciously against that, like, no, I don't think anybody is, we're all equal human beings. But you were culturally indoctrinated since you were a little kid that your auntie was saying, why are you so brown? Are you always in the sun? You look like a poor girl. Stop being in the sun. Use an umbrella. That stuff, really, they say this stuff. I mean, my partner is Chinese. I know these things. And it's very normal. They just insult each other on skin color. And if you already have that cultural indoctrination, and then you meet, then your son or daughter as a Chinese person comes home with a black African or a white man from Northern Europe, there is already a completely different attitude towards who are you going to accept. I can give you an example. There are lots of places in China where they are looking for English teachers, but they must be Caucasian. I mean, why do they need to be Caucasian if you have fantastic black English teachers? You know what I mean? So in that sense, China has a long way to go, and you also see it in video games, just like with the Japanese. The Chinese also, if you see popular culture video games, all the characters have pale skin. I do agree that China does a lot for ethnic integration, and I think China can be celebrated for that. But when it comes to colorism and skin color, there's quite a long way to go.
Interesting dynamic to talk about, because so as I was saying, there's that like difference between just basically solar energy levels between Europe and I guess the equatorial regions. But in Sri Lanka, of course, we have major colorism. So there was one sort of like biscuit ad where like a darker girl comes out, but then the groom doesn't want her, but then the lighter sister gets the guy. That's a classic. There's an Indian movie, Bahubali, which I love, but the bad guys in that are like just ridiculously dark. And that's like part of the badness of them. And then in China, I saw some ad where like they were advertising a washing machine, and then I think they put a black guy in the washing machine. The white guy came out, and they were like, "Yeah, good washing machine." Like,
yeah, seriously, it's that blatant. Yeah,
but you have to think about like why is that, right? So lately I've been walking around more because we have like fuel crisis here. So I've been walking more, and I get darker. So if I'm in a car and I go from the car to if I go from the house to the car to the AC, I don't get dark. So I actually get physically lighter. But someone who is working outside, someone who is picking tea, they're dark. Like they get darker. But you can see on my skin essentially how protected I am from physical labor, from being outside. Like, am I able to like exercise like in an air conditioned space and so on? Am I protected from the sun? You can see it in girls. If they just cross the road, they'll hold like their like a notebook or something above their head, or people just walk around with umbrellas and like poke me in the eye all the time. Like, but it is like it's a clear sort of class marker. If you're taking the bus, you're going to get darker. If you have a car, you'll be lighter. And so you can see, because our skin color like changes. Like if I go swimming, if I go to the beach for like even 2 days, I'm visibly darker. So our skin color like measures essentially like how protected we are from labor. So it's a weird sort of physical class marker. It's not just like a global sort of energy marker, but like and like Indians have like perfected this the colorism like casteism thing. Like it's quite deep. Sri Lanka is like less so, but it is, there's still something real, right? People act like, oh, race isn't real, we should just get along, but like it is real. There is an energy difference between North and South, and that has some effect on people's skin over generations. And then there is some color difference based on how much time you physically spend outside. So there are those issues of like power. If you were in a different power dynamic where like if we're in power dynamic where someone picking tea got paid more than someone who sat in an office, then you might see dark skin becoming valuable. Obviously, that's not the world we live in, but what you're seeing is sort of like the power dynamics reflected. And if you're in a world where people from the South sort of controlled their resources, where like if Africa controlled its resources,
Well, you had a dynamic that like that, Indy. Let's not forget that the time that leisure time became a marker of money, and people started to sunbathe in the West, and the tan skin was a marker of
yeah,
beauty
I
and
always find that
attractiveness.
really
That was a
funny.
form of classism,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah. And you know, the thing for me is if I go out in the sun, I get skin cancer. So I need to stay sheltered.
There is this like weird relationship with basically the sun and like us and like how that affects how we relate to each other. So Benji keeps talking about how it's a hierarchy, and it is a hierarchy. But one thing I'll say about whiteness, and it feels weird that I'm like the one defending it on here, but like it is an inclusive hierarchy. So within like people I know, we have a real class difference between basically like there's like a servant class and then there's like a served class, or there's like a rich and poor, and they don't mix. Like people will marry across race and so on, but they don't marry across that line. Like they don't. I know one person in my family who married it across that class line, and like they got kind of like shunted out for a while. But like my wife knows someone where they were essentially from sort of the servant class, but then they went abroad, and then once they're abroad, they could change. They could change. So they became, so now when they come back, they're
Become
like
white.
us. Like as in like they're speaking English, and like that lets them sort of like jump the hierarchy that we have here, which is fixed. I think maybe if we talk about it, if we zoom out to like a socio-political level, they're just perpetuating like a bigger global hierarchy. But whiteness does work in the sense that it does enable people to jump out of whatever. So Europeans, right? If you're stuck fighting between like the next tribe over, or like I don't know who fights in Europe, like Belgians and French or whatever, but like Huguenots and non-Huguenots, that like you're having these like problems. You can jump over to America and like wash that out. And in Sri Lanka, there's like, or in India, if you're like from a, it's weird because they transplanted Indian caste to Silicon Valley. I don't know how that didn't come out. But for a lot of Sri Lankans, you can jump across the class barrier by migrating. And like whiteness works in that sense, right? It is a fluid identity in that sense.
But I would still say, and I don't know, Benji, maybe you have some opinion on that about France. I still think that's context dependent. I come from the Netherlands, and while the Netherlands conceives itself as really tolerant and very open-minded, I don't think there are quite stringent lines into whiteness. I think that if you are too visibly not white, and I do not include myself in there, so I must say I can reap the benefits. You could say, especially if I would hide my name. But I would say that for a lot of people, if they are a bit too dark or a bit too religiously different, there is no way you are included. And even if people would say, "Oh, you're part of you're Dutch," there is this tangible, qualitatively different treatment that happens to people who are too visibly different. And there, at least in my country, there is no way to cross that boundary. So I would say that is, yeah. Sorry.
Well, there's one video that came out. There's someone, I think her name is Priya Patel. I might have got that wrong, but it's just like some online person, and she posted a video saying like, if you immigrate and you don't assimilate, that's just called invasion. And so she's saying like a right wing sort of anti-immigration American thing, and fully American accent. I think she has a white mother or whatever. But in the comments, she gets roasted for like being brown, and they're like, it's like not you can't do enough. Like you look Vivek Ramaswamy or whatever. All these people who try to like become the voices of whiteness, and they're trying to be good at it, right? They're working hard at it, but like they still can't get in. Like, and I think for a while, I could feel it when I was growing up. While I grew up in the '90s in America, and then there were resources there, and things were going good. So like while things are going good, they're fine including people in stuff. But there's, I think, Asada Shakur says, like scratch any liberal, and like the minute, anytime, and the second something starts going bad, you'll think you've like uncovered Hitler. So like now, when things are going bad, all the people who like, and I feel bad for people who migrated, right? Because they migrated thinking that they would, have a chance to like climb this hierarchy, and then they're finding the hierarchy is closing, like it's closing shop, and yeah, like you said, Karim, there is I think the barrier used to be less, but now the barrier is getting pretty tight, and you're seeing like exactly who's white and who's not. And if you look at geopolitically, like look at who gets missile defense stuff, right? The UAE like doesn't. They're not white enough, and then even the Jews are like not quite white enough, because if you're really white, you can commit a genocide and get away with it, like Australia, like Canada, or like Germany, and then you can actually become like experts and lecturers and like elders on speaking about this subject.
Well, you're de-whited. I always say you are de-whited when you become a burden. So, for example, when you have a Cash Patel or whatever, and they're so racist and this and that, and then you're useful. You're part of the club, but you're the first one that gets kicked out once you're a problem. And
yeah, it's like a talking monkey, right? It's like you keep it. It's like Michael Jackson's like Bubbles or whatever, right? You keep it, but then once it gets too aggressive, you got to put it in the home.
Exactly, and you see it also with, for example, it's very shocking. You even see it with Ashkenazi white Jews.
Of course.
I mean, they're becoming a burden, and they're de-whited. For among a lot of right-wing conservatives, they're being de-whited because they're a burden. You see?
Yeah, and and I love your analysis, India, on this, because it always relates to the relations of production and social reproduction, and to the political economy, right? At the end of the day, this is what it is. This, what you call colorism, this colorism is actually first and foremost a marker of class, because when you go out in the sun, you change color, and when you don't, you change color also, right? So there is a visible difference between the people who work outside and the people who live inside. And of course, the people who live inside in a class society are those who are actually on top of the class hierarchy, because they don't do the work of producing what is needed for social reproduction in a society beyond the hunter-gathering, right? And it's very important to keep this in mind, because otherwise we can veer off into, well, that's human nature. Humans are always trying to put themselves up, big themselves up against others. And when it's not, whites against Jews, it's whites against black, or black against white. This is just human nature, and just deal with it. I don't buy this. It really depends on those systems of meaning, mental structures that come for a reason. They help us navigate the world. And for us humans, the world is first and foremost the world of social relations, of the political economy, how things are organized and on what basis. So you go back to that point, but not in the kind of vulgar Marxist way you say nothing matters other than class, because a lot matters, because we are narrative creating creatures. And thank you very much, because you see, in a way, being French, I'm colorblind, because we're only interested in universalism. When I looked at that picture of China, I didn't see that in terms of, I just looked at it again in terms of skin color. They're all the same. And they're all this super pale color face. And now I see it, right? And this is a class marker, and it's a class marker that is being reproduced in a nominally communist society, but a society, I'm not this kind of Marxist who thinks that the day after the revolution, all contradictions are over, and there are no class contradictions anymore, and it's all a kumbaya and happy campers until the end of time. This is like a millenarist view. Of course, even after the revolution, you have a lot of class contradictions. You have your own history to contend with and look at it critically. And clearly, Karim, you pointed out to the fact that it looks as though Chinese culture hasn't yet looked at that part of their history, right? This colorism. And I think I know I'm always glazing you, Indi, but we have an agreement that I can do it. You've really helped me see it when you go, okay, at the end of the day, it's an energy differential, right? When you're closer to the equator, you get more sun energy. Therefore, your skin goes darker. The people who are further from the equator hate this stuff because they don't have enough energy. So, they don't have enough energy to run their society. So they come to your society and they start genociding you, raping you, and extracting your resources. And they justify it by saying, yeah, but you're barely animals, right? Actually, we think animals are kind of better than you. And this is, you have to go back to the political economic roots of it if you want to understand it, but not stay there and then look at the mental structures, at the systems of meaning that you live inside, because that we need to do a work of decolonizing our minds, whichever side of those shifting definitions we find ourselves on. Like I remember a time when there was real racism against Italians, right? And what I mean by real racism, to be very clear, is a system of economic oppression of a particular group based on, in terms of its legitimation, the fact that they are, brown, black, they have this religion, they have that, and it has material consequences in your everyday life, which is why, by the way, there is no
correlation. You could say a correlation.
Right. There's no anti-Jewish racism in the West today because you don't find Jewish people being discriminated against, not having access to particular material resources or positions in society due to the fact that they're identified or that they're identifying as Jewish, right? It may come back, but at the moment, it's not here.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I would say it's what I meant with correlation is when you correlate phenotype to material outcomes. That is, when your brain correlates continuously. Okay, so for example, if a little child sits in the back of the car from her parents every day to school, she looks outside of the car in Malaysia. I also lived in Malaysia, same thing, colorism. And she looks every day out of their car, little Chinese girl in Kuala Lumpur. And every day she sees very dark-skinned Indians doing all the work in the streets, like construction work and that kind of stuff. Your brain correlates. These kind of jobs, dark-skinned people. These kind of jobs, that class, dark-skinned people. That class, light-skinned people. That correlation eventually becomes a kind of almost fixed reality in your brain, where you see somebody and in a split second your brain thinks, rich person, high-class person, a low person, poor person, purely based on all these little experiences that you had in your life. Hence, I keep saying, woke is not bad. It is counteracting all these little experiences by having kind of different representations, new representations of people of color in positive roles, etc., that counteracts that kind of stuff. Now, you also said something very interesting, Benji, and you said often people try to normalize racism. Racism is something that always happens. It's just human nature. And in one of my academic papers, I actually counteracted that by saying that it also just makes no sense. That is, from an evolutionary psychological standpoint, it makes no sense. What does make sense is xenophobia. That is, if you would be confronted with outgroups, other groups that pose some form of threat. So you were more apprehensive, you were more vigilant. That makes sense. What does not make sense is that we have developed a kind of response to people with a different skin color or a different ethnic look, because most of human history we just did not have the means to fly to the other part of the world and see people of different skin colors. So we did not have 100,000 years of practice to start hating people with a different skin color. It's just evolutionary impossible. So in other words, we never had the time to create an automatic response against people with a different skin color or any different ethnic feature, because for most of human history, the people we were confronted with looked like us. In other words, we're more apprehensive to people who look like us, but maybe behave in a bit of a different way than people who don't look like us, because we did not have the time, okay, to develop that response evolutionary. I think that's a very important point that people really need to start taking with them. Yeah. And then finally, on that energy differential, I like that a lot also, Indi. And I'm going to give you another differential that's also important, and it's in my Psychology of Capitalism paper that I sent to you guys. And that is what I say is that resource differential. That is, if you have a population that comes from a cold climate, limited arable land, low resources, you get an expansionist, aggressive,
we know them as
violent
countries.
Exactly, and you get an expansionist, violent, aggressive, materialistic culture where having stuff makes you better because you have a better, higher chance of survival. So it's no surprise that the most violent expansionist peoples were people from lower resource parts of the world, whether it's the Europeans, the Mongolians, or the Japanese. These are highly imperialist people, and I would say you create a much more docile people if you come from a warm climate. The bananas are growing in the trees, you have everything, you have fruits, you have everything in the ground. Why the hell would you go around the world murder people to get stuff where there is almost no stuff? And across centuries, across thousands of years, that creates that cultural psychology is literally, it culturally evolves a culture of expansionism, aggression, you know. And we could also be racist and then say, oh, people who look like these parts of the world, it creates them as aggressive. White people are inherently more aggressive, but we're not racist. We're saying, no, it's the part of the world that you come from. Coincidentally, you could say they're also low energy parts of the world, so they have lighter skin. And that creates a very violent expansionist culture. And we could also correlate that to phenotype, to the way they look, but we don't. So we focus only on culture, and that creates a very expansionist, aggressive culture. And hence the difference why the South did not colonize the North, but mostly the North colonized the South.
Interesting point. So I was in Norway and we went to a museum, and it was a Viking museum, and they were showing basically like these ornaments, which was, and at one point they were saying, like, I was looking at it and they were like, this is all the gold that they gathered from like robbing Ireland or whatever. And I was looking at it and I was like, I mean, this is beautiful, but this is like a mid-Indian wedding. Like the amount of gold is like a mid-Indian wedding. And I was like, wow, like these people were poor. Like until they discovered oil, these people were like hella poor. And they like didn't have much stuff. And so, yeah, there is like a sort of hunger that comes out of that. And you were talking about the evolutionary aspect, which is correct, right? Like if you encounter different people, like as in my experience going to America, people's experience with me was curiosity because I was one guy. There was no sort of threat. So most of the time in ancient history, if you encountered someone that looked really different for you, that was just great. You would like want to hang out with them and like show them to your friends. It's not like you don't naturally like kill that different guy. I don't think people naturally think like that. But if you want to get evolutionary, this is a pet theory of mine, which I need to flesh out a bit. But if you look at human evolution, humans came out of Africa. So, and humans, we would have been dark. I would bet on that. But there were also like many different other types of hominids, including sort of Neanderthals in Europe. So it's quite possible that they would have been white. So the first case of like black on white violence might have been, or white on black, like it may have been that like colored people like got rid of, I mean, the Neanderthals disappeared for whatever reason, but it may have been the colored people have, you know, like actually got rid of the white people at one point. And so this may be payback. I don't know if that's fair or not, but but it is.
Well, a lot of white people still use that even as an exclusivity marker. They say like, yeah, we are connected to the Neanderthals,
well,
and that's why it makes us different. Yeah, maybe that's why you're so violent.
Oh, because Neanderthal used to be like a bad thing.
Pride ourselves on our Neanderthal DNA. It was promised to us.
Has it become a pride thing? Because it used to be like Neanderthals were bad, but then they figured out that they were like white, and they're like, no, Neanderthal good.
It
As a
reminds me of
proud,
that whole UFO culture, where you have white supremacy is everywhere. You also have that UFO culture, and in the UFO culture, you have one group of aliens, and they're called the tall whites, and they look like Norwegians.
yeah, the Pleiadians, and they came and they changed the DNA of and as the token Neanderthal on this show, let me just say, um, Karim, you are correct, and at the same time, there is something that happens with exploitation. There is some that the ruling classes are very conscious of the systems of meaning that promote their continuing domination, right? So it's not just that it naturally emerges from the material conditions. It is based on material conditions, absolutely, but it is heavily promoted by, a state, community, religious ideology, always on the side of domination. Like you can go back all the way to, the Reconquista, so-called, in Spain. I don't know what they reconquered, but anyway, the conquest of Spain over superior, civilizational Islam, the Crusades, this idea of having the pure blood is a very state ideology in a sense, right? It comes from the top, that very sophisticated intellectual justification for it. And you find a role of intellectuals, you find a role of thinkers, of philosophers, and now our intellectuals and philosophers are all online doing YouTube shorts and participating in the hot take economy on Twitter. But it's all something that's also very conscious, right? When you look at the Hollywood films from the beginning, they were so heavily racist, but for a reason. Like those were the films that were being promoted and they knew what they were doing. It's not just, it's in the water. They notice it arises from the water, but then if you want to keep that particular social composition of the water, you are going to make sure to select what you put into the water. And this is why we get raised into this white supremacy, right? On whether we are, white or one day white or integrated into whiteness or whatever, because at the end of the day, it's about the ruling class, the people who rule, and it will always shift. But a lot of that shifting is done very, very consciously by state actors, or more precisely by the ruling class. Like so, in the U.S., it's those foundations, it's those oligarchs who will directly finance, this kind of cultural production rather than this other kind. The intelligence agencies as well. So there's a clear conscious aspect to it that reproduces it even further.
Yeah, absolutely. Any thoughts, Indy, or not?
You talk about so we can talk about whiteness as a sort of it's a kind of breeding population, right? And with the European nobility, there was this obsession with breeding. Like I studied European history, and I remember the Habsburgs, right? They were bred within an inch of their lives. Or at the time that World War I broke out, those were all grandchildren of Queen Victoria, and they all looked like exactly the same. Like whoever the ruler of Russia and the ruler of England, and I think Greece, and Germany, they looked like the same person. So there is that kind of and they were of course like white and staying inside and whatever. So there is that sort of, yeah, it is there. There's that reproductive. You're talking about production of, it's tied, right? The production of resources and the reproduction of people, and then there's this kind of person that you want to reproduce that should be the natural master of those resources. It's a class that's become like a sort of natural master class, and it's inclusive up to a point, but then it does want to wash out those changes into whiteness.
Well, what you're saying, I'm sorry, I was just quickly Googling, because what you're saying reminds me
Some
simply
pictures
of
of those
what we're
guys,
seeing.
they're fantastic.
Yeah, well, what you're saying is just reminds me of what we are seeing right now at the Epstein case. It's that really disgusting, inbreeding, incestuous, pedophilic kind of sexual deviancy intertwined with race science. In this case, he talked about he talked about goyim and wasps and that kind of stuff. I mean, but it's still the same idea, and we're still all whites and Ashkenazis. I mean, let's be honest here. And I was actually googling the head of Rothschild. What is his name? Jacob Rothschild. Jacob Rothschild. Yeah. Look at him. I mean, that's the quintessential example of you. I would say almost that kind of white royal family inbreeding kind of Epstein kind of face. It's very scary. And all these royals had those families.
That's like Habsburg level. Like he's gone too far. It's like Habsburg level. Like.
Yeah.
But can I just say on this point, and Epstein in particular, beyond what you just said, Karim, or as part of what you just said, there was this, and it's still afoot, obsession with eugenicism, right? The obsession with producing the master race. And again, once you think about it, it's not white, like it's not necessarily to Epstein. It wasn't like the Nazi Aryan ideal, right? It wasn't necessarily blonde and blue-eyed, although, in some of the Zionist founding texts, you see they actually want to turn whatever is the Jewish nation, whatever the hell that means, into Aryans in a way, right? But it's this idea, and you go back, and again, I'm always going to bring you back down to this fundamental level of engineering more than human worth, even at the biological level, right? So this is what they want to do. They want to go into this lab where they could, like Epstein was, and they're thick as a brick, right? Like I think you talk about Rothschild. There's Nadine the Rothschild, who was a very good friend of Epstein, and apparently IQ is like around 83 or something. She is literally thick as a brick, and
Trump level IQs that these people have. Yes.
Yeah, but without the street smarts, right? Because Trump is an IQ is a stupid white supremacist measure. But what I'm trying to say here is, once you're inside this supremacist system of meaning, you want to reproduce it. If you're on the good side of it, I don't think it's good. It's just inhuman. But and they just want to do, and they had this stupid idea where literally Epstein was trying to get DNA samples from the members of every ruling family in the world, right? On this stupid idea that if you've risen to the top, you must be top notch. And just totally forgetting, the social conditions. Like if you want to rise to the top in one of the Gulf, whatever they are, satrapies, you have to be the most depraved guy around, so that the CIA
psychopaths
makes you, or whatever, but not necessarily the smartest man in the room. But this idea that you can somehow engineer even further superiority, and it takes them all the way to transhumanism, because if you are more than all other humans, and it gets more and more rarefied, right? At the end of the day, there are just three good folks in the world: Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and I don't know who else, maybe Jared Kushner or whatever. And these are
Alex Karp.
Yeah, Alex Karp. Oh, yeah, he's the genius. Alex Karp, of course,
he's half black though, so he's a bit suspect.
He makes Karl Marx.
And not just that, he comes from an activist family. His parents trained him to be an activist against racism. It's unbelievable.
I know. And so because you put yourself above humanity, you end up actually hating humanity to the point that you go to this project of transitioning out of humanity. So, you know, the whole thing kind of is almost like this snake that eats itself in the end by trying to better humanity, to make the superior humanity, which by the way goes with killing all the other subhumans so that the race stays pure. You will eventually want to F off out of humanity. And that tells us something, by the way, because, you know, I just don't want to do interpretation and diagnosis. It tells us how to counter it, because it gets to the point where it's so obvious, like you have literally the side of death, the side of people who consciously try to violate everything that makes us human, right? It's no accident that they even sexually trade their own children with one another, you know, because they need to step out of humanity to feel more than all the time. This is what it is. I don't think they're particularly attracted sexually to children. That's a very different thing. Maybe some of them are, but it's more kind of, you know, to the transgression, because the power makes me superhuman. It's like this Nietzschean nonsense, you know, I create right by my might. And once you see it for what it is, like this death machine wanting to kill everybody, wanting to kill nature and then F off to Mars, then you can look inside your heart, look into the eyes of someone else and go, oh, well, I think I'm one of those. Like I'm one of what the resistance in Gaza called the free people of the world. I'm not part of that crazy Epstein class. I'm one of the free people of the world. And by the way, even for the compradors, the psychological space is narrowing, because now you have a choice of, okay, you're either a servant of the Epstein class, and maybe one day you will ascend to being invited to this great Epstein Island. The biggest Epstein Island, by the way, is called Turtle Island, right? And it's this settler colony in North America, in Canada, and in the US that's been a rapey thing from the beginning. I mean, the rates of sexual abuse in those places are incredible. And if you're even superior, then you get invited to that smaller Epstein Island. And you know what? I'll bet you that on Epstein Island, there was also this little room where only the rarefied, you know, chosen six would go and all the rest of it, because that's the logic
temple.
of it. The temple, the blue and white temple. My God, I'll
Yeah, the
never
Lego
make
guys
another
covered it.
blue and white Lego building ever again.
Well, you will see that these people don't only these royal families and these Epstein types. They don't only select each other based on skin color, what you saw over the centuries. They kept it inside, pale skin and everything. But you need to be a phenomenal psychopath to stay on top. So over the centuries, it was psychopathy selecting for psychopathy. It created the most raunchy, evil people that reproduced, to the extent that you cannot believe what these people are doing on the Epstein Island, or how they are mass murdering Palestinians or bombing countries into smithereens. These people are the result of, many of them, centuries of psychopathic inbreeding. You know what I mean?
No, and I think that's an interesting point. I'm going to go pretty loopy here. But if you think about, like, what is the reason for, like, white supremacy, right? It's not just people being bad necessarily. That's not a very interesting as an explanation. It's kind of like a battery. Like a battery has a positive and a negative, and then energy moves based on that battery. So if you set up a hierarchy, you can move energy. So within a class, like even let's say within Sri Lanka, we have that battery where the darker people do the work, and then their labor force moves to the lighter people. So that's how tea gets from the bush to the cup. It has to be that energy differential to move that labor and move those resources around. And if you look at colonialism, it created like a giant global battery where resources, the triangle trade, right? Resources go from Africa to America, get processed by Africans, and then back over to Europe, and then back down, and then the battery sort of forms an energy loop. So whiteness as an idea is a great energy source. It turns human hierarchy into a form of energy for just like changing the whole world. But then you have to ask, who does that energy benefit, right? So one thing I often wonder if like an alien anthropologist came to Earth First off, they'd be like, nice pyramids, guys. Like we built those. But like if the alien anthropologists came, would they be like, so who would they think is the dominant species here, right? Because let's say you go by tombs. So if you dig up a tomb, we measure tomb or graves by, you have a human body, but also the grave goods that are buried with it. Their swords, I think they had like penis sheaths, like their jewelry, the metal things that they're largely buried with. That's like, oh, that's civilization. That's when we're human. Before that, we were like apes. Now we're human. But an alien looking at that, would they see the human evolving and ruling, or would they see the metal evolving? Because you get the metal that goes from a sword to like a wheel to a bulldozer to a tank, and then you see the bones seem to say the same, but these metal things are evolving at like quite a different rate. And so the reproduction of capital has become tied to this hierarchy of human reproduction, where, as you said, they reproduce psychopaths. So in any sort of hunter tribal society, if you get someone like a Peter Thiel or an Elon Musk, it's not even that they would be like stopped, they would be just laughed at and like mocked, like, why are you hoarding all like the areca nuts? Like, why are you hoarding, like, who are you? Like they just like wouldn't, you couldn't create such a person in like a small society. Yet this like whatever reproductive system we've replicated across the globe reproduces that person. Like a psychopath who can't really hold a family together, who is who's not happy, but like that is what, when you have to question, who is it reproducing for? Because it's not serving humans. Our bones are staying the same, and in the US their like life expectancy is going down, so their bone quality, if you're an anthropologist measuring it, they'd be like, oh, these people have like bad teeth and like seem to be carrying a lot of weight on their frames. Like it wouldn't look like a human evolution happening there. But you can see that there's a capital evolution. So what I always talk to Benji about is like, I say that we are surrounded by artificial life, and like AI is already running the world, as in corporations are legally people. That's not even controversial. But you have to consider, like, how does human reproduction tie in with capitalist production? And whiteness as a hierarchy has been very good for capitalist production. And the other movements that are trying to compete with that, like say communism, or you could say is like the Islamic Revolution, anything else has been trying to center the human being at this, and capital doesn't like that, so that has to be killed. And yeah, anyway, that's all the weird stuff.
Yeah,
that's I really like how you say. Sorry, Benji. Sure. 1 minute. I really like how you say that about how capitalism is pitted against human evolution. So capital evolution versus human evolution. So we have capital evolution, but human evolution is stagnating. Well, you could even say it. If human evolution would not have stagnated, we would all look like Indi, or people even from sub-Saharan Africa, because evolution would protect us from the sun and would give us better eyes with dark eyes and etc. and darker skin and etc. But for capital evolution, capitalism, that racial system was very beneficial. So you get all these Jacob Rothschild types that stay on top. They don't evolve. They become worse and worse and worse. Yeah, and capital is indeed evolving. I love that. I love that.
It's a funny way to think about it, because so you do reproduce someone who's like built to be indoors. And someone was talking about like ADHD to me at like some party yesterday. I was like, well, in what world would you, in like for most of human evolution, being able to sit still and do nothing while staring directly in front of you, that would have been the abnormal person. Like that, like, but that's somehow what we're like breeding for now.
That point of Indi is, of course, it's another point that changed my thinking. To think of capital as a AI, like you have this great line where you say Marx's Capital is the first natural history of an artificial intelligence, right? And I am a student of Ali Kadri, who in his accumulation of waste, should be called by waste, but has actually uncovered the ultimate logic of capital, right? So if you go back to Marx says, look, capitalism is about taking from you what is most alive, your capacity to interact with the world, the material world, and change it. The most creative thing, the most human thing, that you can think of stuff out in the world and change it, is what makes us living humans, right? Humans who can't do this, we take care of them, but they're not part of the community of living humans. And capitalism takes this from you and says, okay, for so many hours a day, this most creative, most alive thing of yours belongs to me, and you are going to do it in the way, to use it in the way I tell you, or in the way that serves me. And I'm going to give you for it something that is less than what it is really worth, so I can make this thing that I call profit. I can extract value from that most alive thing of yours, right? So it's literally turning living stuff, what makes us living humans, into this unalive thing that we call profit, to just accumulate it for no other reason at the end of the day than to accumulate it. Every other justification, it makes the world better and everything we know is nonsense. When there isn't a communist threat, we see exactly where it goes. It goes, okay, so if, and it's the logic of it, like it's the logic of the algorithm. If I make money by extracting by unaliving what is most alive in human beings, then you are you're a machinery of death. Eventually, you will make money by making people die earlier because it's cheaper to reproduce them. If you don't have to pay pensions for them, if you don't have to cure their cancers, it's even better. Hey, wait, I can make money out of those cancers, out of those people dying. I can make money out of genocide. I can make money out of bombs. And so it's turning everything alive into that stuff. And, Karl Marx in Capital has this very famous line where he says, capitalism is the vampire that sucks the blood out of the working class. I don't quote me on this, like I'm paraphrasing. And what we didn't understand until Ali Kadri's analysis, and also your way of looking at things, Indi, is this isn't a metaphor. This is exactly what it's doing. It's literally turning living stuff into dead stuff. And you are never free with capital. Whether you're a capitalist or you're an exploited, you are nothing to the algorithm. Like the algorithm doesn't care for Elon Musk any more than it cares for a 2-year-old in Gaza that gets killed because of Elon Musk's technology, or Alex Karps or whatever. It cares for nobody. Like Elon Musk is truly a miserable POS, and so is Donald Trump, and so is Alex Karp. You see those people as a clinical psychologist, there's something not quite right with them. You know what I mean? Because capital hates life, like not in the way we hate things, not in the living way that we can hate and rage, which is healthy in many places, but in the sense that it's there to turn every living thing into that stuff. And the sooner we see it, the more chance we have to step out of it. And I think today it's so clear. And this is why, by the way, political Islam works so well, because it says we're on the side of humanity. We go beyond life. You can't make our death into a commodity, because we reclaim death as martyrdom, and it connects us to a higher life. So therefore we stay on the side of life, even when you kill us and we become martyrs, because our martyrdom then feeds that project of human emancipation, which is basically, we are all equal. We're all brothers and sisters. It's not an accident that in Islam, everybody calls one another brother and sister. It's this recognition of common humanity. Doesn't mean we're all the same. It means we are all as human as one another. And that is the way out of this madness. Brother,
You
brothers
made an
and
interesting
sisters.
point there that made me think. You said it takes the most alive thing from you, right? Like when you work, basically. And that made me think, well, when do you work, right? If you work a capitalist job, you work 9 to 5. So what does it take from you? Like it takes the sun. It takes the sun from you. So if you work within a capitalist production system, you will get whiter. Like I would get whiter, right? So like I get darker if I'm out in the sun. And if I'm working an office job, well, I was in the UK for a bit and it would get dark at like 3. So there'd be some days I'd never see the sun. It takes the sun from you. And then it takes you into like the bowels of its reproductive system. So of course it wants like someone pale and blind and like used to focusing on a screen in front of them and like taking methamphetamine if that's what's necessary. And it reproduces a certain type of person. It reproduces like a Rothschild. It reproduces whiteness. And I often think like human civilization emerged at the time that we domesticated animals. And I wonder, like, did we domesticate ourselves, or like did something domesticate us? Because there's obviously something in us that makes us rebel constantly, but we're not exactly there. But at some level, and if you look at, I was reading this book on liberalism by Lacerdo, and the liberal thinkers, like they really thought that non-white people were like animals. And even the more sort of nice ones among them, like Montesquieu or whatever, would be like, well, you should treat the animals better. Like you should feed them and clothe them, but like definitely don't let them take arms. That's for like men. And but there is this idea of like non-white people as and Benji says like they're not. It's not even that they're above animals, right? Because there's more people are trying devoting more energy to rescuing donkeys from Gaza than like people. Well, like
Or dogs.
yeah, like but there is this idea that people are animals, and you can see that in the logic of like, well, of course Palestinians don't have the right to self-defense if they don't have a self, right? If they're not human. Like we don't say that like cows, maybe they do, they probably should, but cows don't have the right to self-defense. But there's the idea that certain humans are like animals, but then certain humans, the white ones, are like not animals. Those are humans, and they can have like liberal rights and like liberal democracy and so on. Or maybe Palestinians will give them like a baby democracy for a while and see if they like can grow into being like white people. Anyway.
On this point, I would like to quote Karl Marx, if I may, in the contribution to a critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, which is an early text of 1843 of Marx. He writes, so this part is very famous, but then we'll get to the very interesting part, I think. The weapon of criticism cannot, of course, replace the criticism of the weapon. Material force must be overthrown by material force. But theory also becomes a material force as soon as it has gripped the masses. Theory is capable of gripping the masses as soon as it demonstrates ad hominem, and it demonstrates ad hominem as soon as it becomes radical. To be radical is to grasp the root of the matter. But for man, the root is man himself. And listen to the next thing. The criticism of religion ends with the teaching that man is the highest essence for man, hence with the categoric imperative to overthrow all relations in which man is a debased, enslaved, abandoned, despicable essence, relations which cannot be better described than by the cry of a Frenchman. I'm so proud I'm a Frenchman. When it was planned to introduce a tax on dogs. Poor dogs! They want to treat you as human beings. So do you get what this says?
Yep.
But Marx gets to the root of what I'm talking to you guys about. He hasn't got the psychology, and now we have the scientific psychology, and I really hope to promote it, which says we become consciously human by recognizing ourselves in the eyes of another as the same and different. There's a dialectical opposition there. I'm the same and different than you, and this is how we become human. And this is why there's always this seed of equality within us. Like you can never uproot it. You can try to DNA engineer yourself. Your children may see it because they become human by recognizing that common humanity and the difference at the same time. But Marx puts, the focus on everything that debases, that enslaves, so that makes you live inside that unequal system of being. And then he says, people get it, like this French man when they start to say, let's put a tax on dogs, and the French guy says, oh my God, they want to treat dogs as bad as they treat humans. And you find this all throughout history. I lived in England for a while, and you had these little old ladies, Karens. We started talking about a Karen, who have charities about, how Portuguese people treat donkeys really badly. And you have, I saw this video, I never found it again, but one of the most telling videos from the Gaza Holocaust for me was someone showing to a Zionist lady, a squatter, videos of the Holocaust, right? And she would see children and families and people being, destroyed and buildings being dropped. And it's only when she saw a donkey caught under the rubble that she went, oh, poor donkey. So it's literally a system of meaning that puts humans below animals. It's not just that they're subhumans, they are literally sub-animals, right? They're sub-animal humans rather than subhuman animals, like they say, And that is very important because it also shows you how capital expels us out of the natural world, expels us out of nature, expels us out of the normal state of nature, and we live in nature. And I'll finish by this thing. I saw there is this study, I think in Finland, where they put children in the, children, and I got this from Michael Parenti, children in the West are now living in prison. They get 1 hour outside a day, and they're always under surveillance. When I was a kid, it wasn't like this. We used to roam the streets and do all of this. Now it's not like, and they go to these parks, to these playgrounds. And the playgrounds these days in the West are all synthetic everything, rubber ground and everything. And they did this experiment where they put rubber ground playgrounds and on the other side, normal earth and leaves and natural playgrounds. And lo and behold, the folks in the natural playground have much stronger immune system, less allergies and everything because we are part of nature. Capital takes us out of nature by trying to make everything into an unalive commodity, and eventually it makes us sick, which makes more profit and all the rest of it. And we totally lost this connection with nature also at the psychological level.
Yeah, and I think the latest news we saw coming out of Gaza is, I would say, the quintessential example of that dehumanization of human beings even below animals, is where dogs have become part of the torture class in as what is this, Sde Tayman prison, where dogs are raping Palestinian prisoners. So they have become part of the torture class among all those prison guards. And shockingly, many of those dogs are German shepherds trained in the Netherlands. Okay, that is. I've seen that there are protest groups in the Netherlands who are trying to stop the Dutch sending these dogs to Israel. But that's, yeah. What can we say? I would say that's peak dehumanization. It's unbelievable what's going on there.
Yeah, and it's traumatic to the animal. It's traumatic to, like, everybody has to hear about it. It's shocking.
It's horrible, and I saw this very, very beautiful post once by a Palestinian from Gaza, and that Palestinian, I wish I still had that post. That Palestinian spent a very long ode. We say in Dutch ode, 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 like a, how do you say that in English? A praise song.
Same word in English.
Ode, yeah, an ode. Yeah.
Oh, ode. Okay, yeah, like a praise song to his donkey, and say, we never spent the time to thank you for all the moments where we had to go from place to place to place, pack our bags, everything, and you were always there, helping us in the background. Nobody was paying attention to you, but never complaining, always helping us getting our stuff from place A to place B. And the post was so good because it was so pure. You really felt like how important that donkey is that we never think about. And it was so well written, like, yeah, we almost look, when we see these pictures, we almost look at the donkey as if it's a car. We know we don't even pay attention. But he personalized that donkey and really gave it the respect for, like, really saving that family, And I was like, yeah, beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff.
Like, white supremacism is, if you start thinking about it a bit, you end up at human supremacism. Like, it's not just like, why is one person better than another? Why are we better than like, because what we're talking about is relations. Like I was trying to explain race to my children, or my children were asking me, and I was like, well, it's like families, because and that's not my explanation. I was reading like a scientific book about it, and then they were like, well, it's kind of just, it is kind of like a breeding population. It's like a large family, and like our family doesn't stop at humans. Like we're apes. Like we are apes, not in an insulting way. Like that's our family. As apes, we are mammals. That's our family. If you come to call someone a dog or like a donkey or something, it's hardly an insult. It's like calling me like my uncle or my nephew or something. Like this is our family. And like whiteness is, it does more than like strip you out of your common humanity. It strips you out of your common animality. It strips you out of nature. It puts you in a box 9 to 5, and then it puts you reproducing. Because you look at like what is success in the capitalist system, people don't reproduce anymore. You get. I was talking to a Sri Lankan guy who was a doctor. Him and his wife were both doctors in Texas, and they were like 40, and they're like, okay, I think we made enough money to like have kids. And I was like, how old are you? He's like, yeah, he's 40, and he's gonna have like one kid. As like the same way that you maybe get a Ferrari, it's probably cheaper to get the Ferrari, but that's what like a sort of kid is. Like we're not reproducing humans anymore, and we're of course like you talk about the genocide of Gaza, but like we're genociding the natural world. That's been going on for centuries as well, and it is connected, and it's that hierarchy. And we got to understand that like even white people, if you consider yourself a white person, you are not at the top of the hierarchy. There's a different species called capital that it's at the top. And even if you're like if you work your hardest in the system, you'll be lucky to have like 2 kids, or you could be like Elon Musk and have like 15 kids you don't know. You know, like there's no
gut.
Yeah, there's no like human happiness at the end of this thing. There's just like some line on a spreadsheet going up, and then some oil burning somewhere, and some machine that's reproducing,
and some line going up your nose, to be fair. Also, don't forget that.
Yeah, and then the drugs and like everything is connected because you fundamentally can't feel anymore. But you could get what we had feeling. Like I mean, my wife always tells me, "Oh, like why don't you go back to the village?" Like you keep harking back to that. But like I did go back to the village yesterday because we went for my grandfather's death anniversary, and like you just were connected, and you got darker because you were outside all the time, but you were connected to something.
Absolutely. We're already at 2 hours here, guys. We could go on forever. So I think we just should make this theme and this roundtable a regular.
No, this is excellent. But I do have to go because my kids are like, my son just sent me a message saying,
but I have one.
Outside, there's nature.
Yeah. No, me too. But I have one final question for.
That father you are.
Yeah.
One final question for Benji, and I will next time when I edit it, I will tell the people in the show to jump to the final part to check that out if they're interested. I want you to tell us what you are doing with Palestinians in Gaza and how people can donate, because you have a very personal way of connecting to Palestinians. Lots of people are worried when they donate that it's maybe a fake account or fake people. There's nothing more, how can you say that, excellent than what you do, Benji, because now people know, but personally, it gets to Palestine, it gets to these people. Can you tell us how we can donate, how you do that, and where they need to go?
Yeah, well, first let me say there is many things that are more important than what I do, right? Because as folks might have gotten out of, the way I look at things, I'm always looking at the material side of things and at the psychological or narrative side of things. And those two things are intertwined, and the connection must remain in our mind. And if we want to change the world, we need to think about those two. It's not enough to talk about change, not enough to produce content on the internet or whatever, which is, what I do in a sense. You also need to think about what is the material impact you can have, right? And there are many ways to have material impact. I mean, you can look at the war machine, what are the cogs around you and what you can do to throw sand in those cogs. If you do that, more power to you, and never discuss it on the internet. So that's one thing you can do. Or you can be in West Asia resisting the death machine weapon in hand, right? Or you can be in Iran, you can be a female engineer developing these incredible weapons of resistance against the death machine, also known as, Iranian missiles and drones or what have you. So there are so many things that are more important than what I do to do something material. And what I do to do something material is actually the safest thing, maybe not the least important, but the safest thing we can do and the most legal thing we can do as Westerners, which is to send some of that money that our societies in the global north, whichever color we end up being, but we benefit from, are extracting from the global south, send it back to the folks who are resisting on the ground. So I have, over time, I think I started about 15 months ago or so, I first agreed to host a fundraiser in Gaza for a man called Ibrahim, and then he asked me to host some more. So now I host 5, and I've not met him, but I've seen him on video a few times. Also, he was recommended to me by a network of people who are doing this. There's this wonderful network called Lifeline for Gaza, which is a website which brings together all those verified fundraisers from Gazan families and tells you which ones have not received any money and for how long. So you can actually give your money to those who haven't received anything. And so that's all wonderful. And although I have 5 fundraisers, I'm always promoting other ways to give money because I don't want to go capitalistic and competitive, give to my fundraisers or whatever. But anyway, so with those 5 fundraisers, we've raised over $20,000 that we've been able to send directly to Gaza. And what we have to understand is, and the Palestinians will say it, existence is resistance. Staying on the land when they want to ethnically cleanse you, when they want you to go off somewhere else, making that choice of staying on the land where you're going to be starved, where you're not going to have access to medicine, medical supply, baby formula, all the things, housing, electricity, internet, everything is an act of resistance in itself. It's not just, the armed resistance and the martyrs, and glory be to them and swift victory to them. It's the people resisting on the land. So don't just talk about it. Don't just think about it. Don't just watch content about it. Do something material. And there you have to realize what material means. It's not measured by the amount of money you can give. Our friend Justin Potter had this great formula where he says, give until it hurts. And I think it's a great formula. Give until it starts to make you consider the next boutique coffee you're going to have, right? Give until there is some material impact on you, but don't give to the point that you can't, pay your rent anymore. And some of us in the West, I'm not one of those, but some people in the West are really not getting material benefits from this death system and themselves are struggling mightily, right? As the system turns in on itself. But if you're one of those people and you can give only $1 to one of those fundraisers, whether by Lifeline for Gaza or the 5 that maybe Karim will put in the description that I have, $1 is actually material. Why is it material? Not because it's going to make them be able to afford more stuff, but they see it. They have access to the internet. They go and watch their fundraisers. And if they see $1, what are they going to think? This person is trying to humiliate me by giving me almost nothing. That's not what they're going to think. They're going to think this person took the trouble of going through the whole process of, putting their details, and it takes a few minutes. And they gave just $1. They cared enough to do this thing. And that's also material. You see, like Mark said, when ideas are gripped by the masses, they become a material force. And when people see, oh, today I got 10 persons, maybe giving just $1, 10 persons who could give only $1 cared enough to help us continue to resist by existing on the land, to give this $1, that is a material proof that people are actually holding Gaza in their hearts and in their hands in whatever way is possible to them. Of course, if you can give $1,000, do give $1,000. But what I'm saying is, don't give $1, but do that material thing of giving, I want to say back, because, if we're in the global north, most of what we enjoy is actually extracted from reducing life and nature in the global south. And do that and notice how it feels in your heart when you do that. Do that as a conscious, free person of the world, to nourish the spirit of resistance inside your heart, inside your soul. Think of it as you want. And you will notice something very particular happening. It's like you become a drop in the great flood. Martyr Sinwar had this metaphor. He called it the Al-Aqsa flood. And that flood has been washing away so much of the illusions, so much of the pretenses. And we're all a little drop of water, and we can choose if that drop of water falls on the side of the flood. Doesn't matter. Every drop is the same size anyway, so it doesn't matter the size of the drop. It's the direction of travel. Do you go on the side of the flood and the free people of the world, or do you go on the side of extinguishing the spirit of resistance and inflating the ego of supremacy in all its forms? White is the one that's dominant, but whatever, patriarchy, anything, colorism, anything. Or are you going, no, I'm going to do something material, that little thing, and it's going to be little anyway, because it's going to hurt you a little bit, but not so much that it will stop you yourself from existing wherever you are. That was the short version of it.
Yeah, I will put all the links that you email me into the description, so people can go there, have a look, and start donating, helping, because this is very good. You can really see what's happening, what they're asking for. Your name is tied to it, so people who are a little bit more ambivalent about the whole process, you can trust. You see the name of somebody.
You can trust me. I'm a white guy.
He's a white guy. You can trust him. Exactly. And
I'm not one of those shady darkies, So you.
You don't have a Muslim name, so you also have a very European name. So you can trust him.
German even.
But that's the whole shelf model, right? You have to get someone in the empire to vouch for you to run these fundraisers.
Exactly. You have to have a white guy to speak for you. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, but at least we know here that the money gets where it needs to go. So I think that's just very important. So people check the links in the description. I will make sure, Benji, that also at the start of the episode I will have a pop-up, so people can immediately look, and that will hopefully be very helpful. All right, 2 hours, guys. Fantastic. I could go on. We do that next time. We have a very good vibe when it comes about this psychology of racism thing. We need to make this a series, I think. So
no, this is good. There's a lot of stuff. You guys have expanded my thinking a lot. It's great.
Same here. So thanks a lot. Good day to you all, and talk to you soon.
Free Palestine and swift victory to the free people of the world.
Static crackles, voices rise. Truth breaks through their velvet lies. A screen of fire, a shield of steel. BettBeat medium makes you feel. No borders, no change, no silence.